Hey guys, it's Robin, RsIslandCrafts. Welcome to my craft room. Today I am working on finishing off my rooster wall hanging. It has been sitting on the table next to my sewing machine for far too long, so I was feeling fidgety today and not sure what I wanted to work on, so I'm going to finish this off. Since you last saw it, I went ahead and I just did some wiggly squiggly quilting with some yellow thread. But the thing that's different with this one that I wanted to talk to you about is I don't have any backing on it. So I'm not making it as a standard quilt where you put binding around the outside. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the method. There's many different methods, names to this method. Some people call it birthing a quilt. I really don't like the way that sounds. Other people call it the pillowcase method. I don't know why it's called that. Maybe it has something to do with the way you make a pillowcase. I'm not sure. I just call it the flip and turn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish trimming off my batting. And I'm trimming my batting equal and even to the outside of my quilt. Now if I were to make this as a standard quilt, which I could, and put binding around it, I would have to use Tobias binding because of all the curves around the outside. And if I'd had more of this gray fabric, I might have thought about doing it that way. But sometimes with this flip and turn method, I kind of like the way it allows the quilt to just flow to the outside. There's no binding that stops the eye. So it's kind of a very fluid feeling to me. Oh, and I also put a little eyeball on for him. Gotta have an eyeball, right? So, made my quilt top. Put some batting that you can see that I Frankenpieced, quilted all around it, and then I chose for my backing. This quilt is for me, and it would be nice to have some type of a rooster chicken themed backing or something, and I don't have that. So I do have a lot of this paw print. It's a very cute fabric, and I'm going to pretend it's like chicken feet walking all over the place. So this is going to work for me. It'll be on the back. For me, it's fine. So what I do is I lay down my backing fabric. You can starch this if you'd like. And you want to lay that face up. And you want to, I'd already ironed it once, but of course once you move it around the wrinkles come back. But it's mostly wrinkle free. And then you want to place your quilt face down. So we have right sides up on the backing, right sides down, so we have right sides facing. And then I'm just going to take some regular pins. I could, if it was a larger project, I could use safety pins if I wanted to pin it in place. But that's mostly just for quilting. So what I'm going to do, I like to place my cutting board underneath it. It makes it easier. I don't have a hard table to pin on. And when you have something that stops your pins so it doesn't stick into the table below it, it makes it easier. But I like to use that gray fabric because it's a good background to do the videos with. Then I'm just going to take my pins and I'm going to pin around the edge, but I want to make sure when I pin it that either I stick my pins in this way so that I can slide them away, or I just keep them far enough away from the edge. Now when I do this, I've learned the more pins the better, because as you're going around, if you have a walking foot, it makes it easier, but my machine, I don't have one for my machine. So I just put extra pins all the way around. That way as I'm going around, the fabric won't shift and I won't have any wrinkles or buckles. Alright, so let me go ahead and put these pins in and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so as you can see, I put lots of pins all around the edges. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch all around it, about 1/4 inch or so. You can go up to 1/2 inch if you want, but I think 1/4 inch is plenty. And then somewhere along one of these long spots, I'm going to leave an opening. Just like when we make the bags and we leave an opening in the lining, we have to have a place to turn our fabric. So all the way around, leave, depending on the size of the quilt and how much you got to be pulling through, leave anywhere from a 3 to 5 or 6 inch opening. So I'm going to leave about a 3-inch opening, and then I'll be right back. As you can see, I was able to leave the majority of my pins in while I stitched around it. I just kind of slid them a little bit out of the way and moved any that were going to get run over. Now, it might be a little hard to see, but can you see how when I first started stitching it right here, I started outside of the design, outside of my batting, I stitched into the 1/4 inch mark, and then I went all the way around. And when I came out on this side, I'd stopped and I pivoted and I stitched off of the quilt top. That's going to make it easier for the fabrics to turn under when I flip it around. So now I'm going to remove all these pins and I'll be right back. All the pins are removed. I went ahead and trimmed all the excess fabric around the edges. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use these, I always forget the name of these scissors, but they make that little zigzag stitch all around it. Because there's so many curves, you have to sit there and you have to clip each spot all around the curve about 1/4 inch to release the fabric so it can bend and twist and you won't get any buckles and ripples. But if you use these scissors all the way around, it'll do the same thing. So what I do is I just trim just along the outside edge of the batting. Just so I'm going to trim some of the batting and I'm going to trim some of the fabric. But I don't want it to go too close. I want to at least keep 1/8 inch away from the stitching line. That's why sometimes it's good to go ahead and do a larger seam, like maybe a 1/2 inch, instead of the 1/4 inch all the way around. That way you have a little bit extra to trim. It probably would have also been smarter to use something besides a yellow thread because I cannot see the thread as easily. But like I said, that's just one of those little tips and tricks you pick up along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this all the way around and I'll be right back. I went ahead and gave all around the edges a good press. And just like we've done before on many projects, I just realized we did the same exact process when we were making the Christmas mug rugs and the mini wall hangings. That's okay. Now you can see how it's done with a larger project, and it's the same thing. Just turn it all the right side out. Take my crochet hook and run it all along the edges. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it over to my iron and I'm going to roll the seams and I'm going to iron it, and I'm going to make sure all of my backing fabric is behind my quilt. I don't mind if I see a little gray on the back, but I definitely don't want to see the dog print on the front. Just give me a minute and I'll show you what it looks like. So I went ahead and I turned everything under, flipped it all around, gave it a good ironing. I rolled the back and I pressed it to the best that I could. Now you have a couple options here. You can take your opening where all these pins are and you can stitch 1/8 inch all the way around, and it would hold everything in place. And that way, if it's a larger quilt, it'll be easier to go ahead and put it in the washer. Nothing will shift. But for this small quilt, and for the fact that I don't want to have anything, I want it to flow out and I don't want any stopping edges, I think what I'm going to end up doing is just hand stitching this closed instead of using the machine. I know the machine will be a lot easier and a lot quicker, but I have a feeling I will be happier if I go ahead and hand stitch. Now what I will do is I'm going to use a ladder stitch where, have you ever done the ladder stitch before? Let me go ahead and get some thread so I can show you a little bit about that. This pale yellow thread has been working really well for me, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with using that. But I think when I use this, since it's not a very thick thing like a stuffy or anything, I'm going to use one of my finer, thinner needles. I think I'm going to go with this one because there's not too much thickness to the shaft, and the needle, the eye of the needle is extremely small, and it won't make extra larger holes or anything in my fabric. So let me go ahead and thread this. Let's see if I can get this itty bitty eye threaded. I think I'm starting to get to that age now with my eyes that I'm going to need to get a needle threader. Alright, well, it took forever, but I've got it threaded. I'm going to just go ahead and leave it single. I did pull off a little bit more thread than I needed. Go ahead and remove some of these pins. I like to use all these pins if I were using the machine, but for hand stitching I really don't need all these. Now the ladder stitch is simple. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be going in one fabric. I'm going to be going in the back of the quilt and then the front. And there's reason to call it the ladder because the stitches in between look like rungs of the ladder. So I'm going to start it off just past where I'd stopped stitching with the machine before I flipped it. Then I'm just going to go horizontally through, take a little tack of the back quilt fabric, and then right where I came out, I'll take a little tack of the front of the quilt. These are really small stitches, maybe about 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to go back right where I came out into the back. Just take another little small stitch. You see how you have these little rungs of the ladder in there? And then just as I'm going, I like to give it a little bit of a tug. You don't want to pull it so tight that you ripple your fabric. And then I'm just going to keep going all the way through. And then at the end, I'm just going to tie it off like we do any other knot. Bring it through the loop twice. Tuck it down into the fabric. I'm going to make sure I go through the backing only. Check on the front to make sure you don't see no pin, no needle, and just pull it through. A nice little tug and you're done. I'm still working on my ladder stitch. It has gotten much better than it used to be. There aren't as many puckers, but let's see what it looks like after I iron it. Give it a nice little press and there you go. Now, if you didn't want to do the ladder stitch and you didn't want to do the machine stitch, you can also do the whip stitch where you just go like this with the thread over and over and over again. Try to get a matching thread. Maybe use, like if for this fabric, a gray so it won't be as noticeable. But it takes a little bit of practice to get the ladder stitch just right. And remember, this is going to be a wall hanging, so this is something that's good to practice on. It's not going to be really seen. No one's going to see the back of it or anything. But even from the back, it looks really good. So now I got a little quirky shaped wall hanging for my rooster. I'll be able to put him up on the wall now. I didn't want him to have, just like I said, I didn't want to have just a regular square quilt. I wanted it to be a little bit funky shaped because he's a little funky and I think that works really good. So that's how I do the flip and turn, no binding wall hanging. You have a great day and we'll see you next time. Remember, if you like to watch videos like this, go ahead and like the video and please go ahead and subscribe to my channel and you'll be notified when new videos come up and you'll be able to see more. Have a great day.